Welcome. Welcome to another episode of The Release Room. I'm Glenn Pridgeon, coming to you live from the Atlanta, Georgia, as we call it here. We don't call it ATL, and we don't call it Hotlanta, especially not Hotlanta. But welcome. So, different. You may notice something very different today. What's different is I don't have a guest. It's just you and me today. I've been wanting to do this for a while, and I will be live streaming guests next week. I've got a couple great things coming up, but I have been completely fascinated by this company called Theranos. These guys here. So what is Theranos? Theranos is led by a woman, this woman, Elizabeth Holmes. Oh, Elizabeth Holmes, she's in court. She's in a deposition. This was a deposition she gave to the SEC. See, Elizabeth Holmes is one of the, probably the most successful female con person in the history of time. She was a VC hustler. She conned people out of money, and she's looking at 20 years in jail. She settled with the SEC without admitting guilt, but she did settle. She can't run a company for 10 years and all kinds of stuff. But so what was Theranos? Theranos was a company that, with a single prick of blood, would run 250 tests and give you better results than you could get from a standard draw, and I'll explain all of that in a minute. And their goal was to have it within 5 miles, have one of their testing labs or one of their testing machines, this little Edison machine that was, I don't know, this big, at every Walgreens in America, which would put them within 5 miles of every home. And what this would do is give you the ability to go there, pay $2 or $5 or $10 for blood tests, and get the results within a few hours in an app. And what it is you could go anytime without a doctor. Doctor's not necessary. Let's just go get our blood drawn. I want to see if I'm pregnant. I want to take my boyfriend to the Walgreens. This is in the actual example that she gave. To Walgreens so he can get a STD test. Let's do that. Oh, yeah. So, okay. So how did she build this company? Well, she dropped out of Stanford when she was 19 years old. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you a very quick bullet point review. If you want an incredible review of this, go see, the link is below. This is Blondie. She did one of the most amazing 12, 13-minute reviews of Theranos that I've ever seen, and she worked in the phrase golden vagina. So it's worth it just for that to go see it. But she'll give you a much better review, but I'll give you a quick one. So she drops out of school at 19, and what had happened is she had spent 2 weeks, 7 days, I don't know, sleepless. It was sleepless, maybe 1 or 2 hours a night, coming up with an idea for a patch. And this patch would go on your arm, and it would have needles in there, and it would have medicine on board. And it would constantly monitor your blood, and if there was a rise in blood pressure, it would give you a little blood pressure medicine. If you were getting an infection, it would drop in some antibiotics. Okay, so she goes to her male professor after her epiphany, and the male professor says, "Ooh, I love it. I love it. You know what? I'm a chemistry professor. So let's go to the medical professor." Her name was Phyllis Gardner. And she told Phyllis Gardner her idea, and Phyllis Gardner laughed. Phyllis Gardner said, "That's not possible. That can't work," for a whole host of reasons. And Elizabeth Holmes learned a very, very, very important lesson, a lesson that she would benefit from through the history of her con called Theranos. She learned to stay away from women. So, and stay away from anybody with any sort of medical pedigree. And that's what she did. She built a board filled with people such as George Shultz, Henry Kissinger, General James Mattis, William Perry, Sam Nunn, Bill Frist. What do we hear there? Well, A, they're all old men. That was her specialty. And none of them have any medical experience whatsoever. What she did, I think George Shultz was the very first one she got on board. George Shultz brought in Henry Kissinger, and she leveraged the reputations of those two men to perpetrate this fraud for 12 years to the tune of $900 million. It is like how she did this is one of the most unreal stories ever. And to get to that, so after you have checked out my friend here, Blondie, she doesn't know me, but I've been a big fan of hers for years. Then you are going to go Bad Blood. This is the book by John Carreyrou. John Carreyrou is an author for the Wall Street Journal. I think I got that right. Yeah, Wall Street Journal. And he blew the story wide open. And I have to tell you, as we're going to get through this series, and right now I just want to set the series up, and I want to talk about two questions that no one has answered. The two questions that would have stopped this fraud dead in its tracks. At the point when John Carreyrou got his big tip, she was one of the 100 most powerful women in the world. She was the darling of the tech world, the darling of America, really. She was the female Steve Jobs. And it's just incredible to me, anybody that came against her, to include a general who groveled for his job after coming across Elizabeth Holmes. He thought he was losing his career. She was more powerful than one of the highest-ranking generals in the Army. Why? Because she had a relationship with Mad Dog Mattis. It's incredible. So the story's great. So John Carreyrou wrote a masterpiece of a book. I read the book, then I went and got the book on tape, and then I've gone and I've listened to every interview that he's given. I'm a huge fanboy. He brought down one of the most powerful women and one of the top 3 or 4 most powerful and most successful con people in the world. It's really unbelievable. After that, here's another one, The Dropout. See, if you haven't heard of Theranos, you're about to get beat to death with that name. Why? Well, not only was the book successful, now ABC Radio released one of the most popular podcasts called The Dropout about this whole story. It is phenomenal. Bill Gates even looked at it. He even reviewed the book. Bill Gates reviewed the book, and Bill Gates, it is scathing. He holds nothing back, and he basically just talks about some of the details John Carreyrou shares, for lack of a better word, are insane. We're talking about the man that helped create this whole technology world, Silicon Valley, which, by the way, I'm at a loss for words. The next thing is there's an incredible article. There's a incredible documentary that won tons of awards at Sundance and is now about to be released in a couple of weeks on HBO, called The Inventor, Out for Blood in Silicon Valley. Then, if that's not enough for you, let me tell you what else is about to happen. What else is about to happen is there's going to be a movie starring Jennifer Lawrence about Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. So we've got a couple of years of this woman being in the spotlight. And if that's not enough for you, her trial's going to start. And because she's up for, I don't know how many counts, but she's facing 20 years in prison. It's an incredible story. Okay, so I want to focus on a couple things here. I want to focus on the two questions that should have been asked. And this is a setup for my next video, which is probably, quite possibly, without any question or doubt, the worst TED Talk I've ever seen given ever in the history of TED Talks. This is a TED Mad Talk in 2014. Elizabeth Holmes gives this talk, and I want you to know something. She said nothing. She didn't say less than nothing. She said nothing, and she said it poorly. She said it with zero charisma. She's left the door open for so many questions, and nobody asked them. Not the people giving her hundreds of millions of dollars, to include Rupert Murdoch, Betsy DeVos, huge venture capitalist funds. She had one of the biggest lawyers in the world, David Boies, who took stock in the company and became her linchpin lawyer, who would sue without costing her a dime. This guy also didn't know that he was spending his time and money on a company that was a fraud. Nobody knew. Now, again, what did she learn from her first encounter with Phyllis Gardner? What she learned is stay away from the medical profession and stay away from women. And I have a magic effect on older men, so let's stay there. Okay, so the two questions that need to be answered. Number one, she's going to get blood, capillary blood, from a prick of a finger that is known to be less, it's contaminated. It's got all kind of contaminants, and you can't get enough of it. And then you have this venous draw, which is the standard blood test, which, by the way, is painless. People that don't like needles still don't like it, but it doesn't hurt. So she just gets, so you get, the blood. So what do? They get 2, 3, 4 vials of blood, right? Boom, boom, boom. And then they send that off. Why? Because, see, there are two types of blood tests. There's destructive and there's non-destructive, and I'll get into that here in a second. Let's just stick with the finger first, because if you don't solve the riddle of how do I get blood, now she said you could do 250 blood tests off of blood drops, and that her tests were more reliable than the venous blood draw method. Okay, now we're on to something. So I got onto this company and was fascinated by it. Probably 2012, there were some articles starting to come out. And then this TED Talk came up, and I couldn't wait to watch it. And I had these two questions. Okay, so she's invented something at 19 that no one thought of. And it has to be a way of getting clean, reliable blood from the end of your finger. Let me tell you how absolutely difficult this is. This is an article from Reddit, from a user on Reddit who, there's a link to the Theranos Reddit. Go there and you're welcome. It's really awesome. Okay, so here's the thing. When you get blood from the end of the finger and you milk it, so milking, what is milking? Milking is you prick it and then you squeeze, like we've all seen, squeeze to get enough blood out. You're doing so much damage when you milk and you squeeze the end of your finger. So let's talk about it. Here's what we're doing. So squeezing trauma will cause the red blood cells to break open. This causes very abnormal cell counts by lowering the red blood cell counts, but by lowering the RBC counts, but actually increasing other cells because you are squeezing out too many. Okay, RBCs will leak potassium, and there are stories in the book of patients getting these astronomically high potassium readings, rushing to the emergency room because their doctor thinks, look, you're in danger of a stroke, heart attack. You're in big trouble here. They go and they get the test done, and it comes back normal. So the abnormal test. So this is something that actually happens in the book. Okay, so all right. So driving results sky high, your potassium results sky high, and will give the impression that the patient will at any second have life-threatening heart arrhythmia and needs to go to the ER. This was discussed in the book. RBC fragments and concentrated blood platelets will trigger at minimum microclots in the sample, or at max clot the entire sample solid, which makes it useless. It throws all the numbers off. I mean, it renders a sample completely 100% unusable. Okay, so let's say we're squeezing it, right? Squeezing causes low oxygen levels and high acidity levels with abnormally low CO2 levels in tissues and samples. Other abnormal chemistries from the finger tissues that can change depending on how much you squeeze and how much you do it, how much you heat the finger, all kinds of things. Your CPK, glucose, calcium, LDH, enzymes. Okay, so you get the idea, right? So the idea is she needs to solve two things. The first one is I need to get cleaner blood out of the capillaries at the end of my finger than I can get here. It's got to be revolutionary. We don't get anywhere else. We don't get anywhere else until you answer that one question, and nobody asked it. So when this TED Talk happened, I started thinking, hey, she's going to tell us. Like, this is the big reveal. This is the big payoff. See, it's set up, the way she did it, she's got her black turtleneck on. It's set up like a great big, gigantic Steve Jobs presentation, right? Okay, so if it's a big Steve Jobs presentation, look at this. She's all set up, man. She's Steve Jobs in it. So what was Steve Jobs' specialty? His specialty was to lay out a vision, to get you psyched about it, to hook you in with a personal story, with a technical story, an accomplishment, and then unveil the iPad, all right? So that's the moment. Her unveiling this technology was her unveiling the iPad. Not just selling the vision, right? We know the vision. God, I can go to your website and get your vision. Okay. So without that, this whole thing is built on a house of cards and falls apart. That's really the only question that you need is how are we getting clean blood from the finger? And if you're telling me that your tests are more accurate, okay, that's a miracle. And you're 19 and you figured that chemistry out? Okay, so I'm expecting some, so microfluidics is what she touted, what she was an expert in. So if microfluidics, I'm envisioning some hair strand, plexi tube that sticks in the finger that is painless, that gets in and then connects to this, what she called a nanotainer. This is what I'm seeing in my head, and sucks out through into the nanotainer. It's painless. It's not causing any milking or squeezing, so it's reliable, and it's getting deep enough that we're getting enough clean red blood cells, enough clean blood through the capillaries, which is impossible, but somehow she's doing it, okay? Okay, how do we get the blood? Okay, she solved that. Fantastic. Well, you have a nanotainer. This is what this nanotainer looks like. Here you go. There it is. Nanotainer. It's teeny tiny. Do you see how much blood there? Look how much blood is there. It's an unbelievably small amount of blood. What she had touted is she could do 250 blood tests or 30. The numbers were wild on one single drop of blood. Okay, now let's get to the blood test types. So here's the second question that we need to know. We don't have enough blood in today's technology with today's chemistry to run that many tests on a single drop of blood. Here's why. Well, you got two types of tests. You have non-destructive. You have tests that you run on the blood, light refraction and some other things that don't destroy the blood. So it's okay. I can run a ton of tests on it, and it's not going to change the composition of the blood. And you have destructive. The destructive tests introduce chemicals into the blood, and based on how the blood reacts to the chemicals, you can read that and get a reading. That's destructive. That blood is useless at that point. It can't be reused. So how am I going to take this small amount of blood and feed it into your magic machine and have it grow enough blood for me to do those destructive tests on? Like that's the only answer that she can give, is that we're duplicating the blood. Now, when she was young, one of the things that's touted in interviews when they're talking about what an incredible mind this woman is, mind you, they never asked her a technical question or a medical question, nothing. She had, when she was a kid, had put precise blueprints for a time machine. Boom, and I'm thinking, oh my God, she's developed a time machine. In this Edison machine, she has a time machine. So we're going to send it in there, right? We're going to first figure out how do we grow a culture, which takes weeks. You know, like a strep throat culture. Somehow she's got the blood in some sort of petri dish. They send it into the future, grow it, and then send it back in time to the machine. Now I have magically enough blood. Like, this is how preposterous what she's talking about is. It's preposterous. And a 19-year-old, sure, you can have an idea for a social media network, and you can create it. There's nothing that hasn't been created. We had the code. We just needed the mind. We needed someone that understood the workflow of it. The technology was there. We proved it. How do we know it was there? We proved it. He built it. This technology doesn't exist. Microfluidics is it is the holy grail of healthcare. If you can figure it out and do with less, just think of her heart. If you want to talk about having an idea in the right place, yes, there is a need. When you're older and you're elderly or you're very sick, your veins collapse, and it is impossible to find veins to get blood out. Oh, if you could just do it with a capillary prick, well, you can't do a prick, right? So here's the other thing. Well, you would change the world, and you would make the world better for a lot of people. That's an admirable goal. But when you come out and you use old technology to extract the blood, it's game over. It's game over. Like, there's nothing after that that can work. So when she came out and she did a test and they pricked a finger, it's like anybody that knew anything in healthcare knew that this wasn't viable. The second thing is when we go through the TED Talk, we're going to see that she not only does she stay away from healthcare, real, true healthcare terms. Why? Look at her board. She's not surrounded with anyone in healthcare. The second part of it is, all right, so healthcare, here's what we're trying to do in healthcare. So the last 25 years I've been involved in healthcare, the goal is to go from reactive to proactive. We want to pivot. We want to be proactive. Reactive means you get sick and we heal you. We have gotten very good at doing that. Proactive means we see changes in your body composition. We see changes in test results, whether it's blood, whether it's physical examinations, and we take that trend, and as you're trending down towards bad health, we can make adjustments and trend you up. That drives the cost out of healthcare. It drives the premiums down. It drives, I mean, there's so much good about it. So that's a phrase she never, ever used, yet it's a phrase that's used in almost every healthcare presentation right now and for the last 20 years. Proactive and reactive. We're reactive right now. You want to go to proactive. She used terms like it's a human right. We need actionable evidence, which is true, but it's not new. And what you're talking about, you're making a big data play. All of her talks seem like a really juvenile big data play. So anyway, those are the two questions. How did we get the blood? How do we get cleaner blood out of here? And then once we get it, how do we get enough of it to run the type of tests you're saying you can run? No one asked those questions. And over the course of several videos, I'm going to examine some of the most important interviews that she did and watch her pivot away. Either A, there's no technical questions asked, which is most of the interviews, or when they ask some softball technical lob of a question, she pivots right to human right. She's got this fake low voice. It's a human right. It's action. We need actionable evidence. We can do it for $2. It'll be within 5 miles. That's how she talks, I swear. That's exactly how she talks. So that's what we're going to explore. I really love for you to go on this ride with me. I am a Theranos Elizabeth Holmes junkie. Again, this is hilarious. This is the book Bad Blood by John Carreyrou. It is fantastic. I want to end on this, and some people say this is the quote that got her, that unraveled her company. It's really not. It is the incredibly brave reporting. One more thing before we go. Okay, so none of her investors, nobody on her board, nobody that interviewed her, all the people that interviewed her, it was more important to them to make sure that a woman was a Steve Jobs, that she was a woman, and that above all else, she was successful, and nobody can question that because that's what we want. It's admirable. I have 3 daughters. I want that for them. But it's ridiculous that you don't ask the questions. Now, how about her employees? She did have health care. She had some incredible minds working for her. Why didn't they blow the lid on it? I'll tell you why. Remember that David Boies guy I talked about earlier? That David Boies guy was her lawyer, and he sued and threatened and cajoled and frightened and scared and petrified that workforce that all they wanted to do when they left was get away from there. They were sued. They were threatened with lawsuits if they even put that they worked at Theranos. It was such a vile corporate culture that Elizabeth Holmes created, and she used this incredibly powerful board. She used this incredibly powerful attorney, and she used the fact that now she was one of the most well-respected women in the world, period, and one of the most powerful. So employees did come out. Ian Gibbons, he was a scientist who questioned her and was fired and then rehired at a much lower position. There's a whole story in the book, but he ends up committing suicide from the pressure that this company put on him. He thought he was ruined, that he would never work again. There was a CFO very early in the story who questioned Elizabeth Holmes on the fact that he had heard that they were faking tests to investors, and it troubled him. And she fired him on the spot. They sued him immediately. They tied him up so tight that he couldn't say a word. There was a Steve Jobs. Oh, what is his name? I don't have his name. I will bring it up and I'll put it on the link below. But he was Steve Jobs' right-hand man, and he was an absolute amazing person. He was on the board. He watched this for 1 year. He watched her pivot and answer no questions and change numbers and change business plan and change models to the point that he questioned it, and they fired him as a board member and an investor. So he couldn't do it. We're talking about Steve Jobs' right-hand man couldn't do anything to this woman. That's how powerful she was. Look at her board. George Shultz, Kissinger, Frist, Nunn, the military, investors. Rupert Murdoch was a huge investor. Very cool story about Rupert Murdoch in the book as well. So yeah, and then there were two employees, Tyler Schultz and Erica Chung, two American heroes. They were threatened and sued and followed, but you know what? Tyler Schultz had a grandfather. His grandfather was George Schultz, and Tyler Schultz had something called integrity, and Tyler Schultz couldn't be bullied. He had the world against him, and he had John Carreyrou, and that's all he had. Nobody else was going to bat for this kid. Erica Chung, nobody else was going to bat for her. Nobody else was going to bat for any of the whistleblowers that are still hiding and still not wanting their name used. It took John Carreyrou to bring her down. Make no mistake about it. There were people asking questions. Oh, there was someone on the Walgreens teams. They did this big deal with Walgreens. He asked questions. He got thrown off the project. It's a pretty incredible story. So we're just touching the beginning of it right now. Next video is going to be a look at her TED Talk. It will blow your mind. You will not believe it, how bad it is, and how in the world she got away with it. Now, the EH quote, the quote that people say ruined her life and called her out on it. Here it is. Here's the first one. I don't want to make an incremental change in some technology in my life. I want to create a whole new technology, and one that is aimed at helping humanity at all levels, regardless of geography or ethnicity or age or gender. Okay, that's decent. I'll go with that. Okay, number 2. And this is the one. A chemistry is performed so that a chemical reaction occurs and generates a signal from the chemical interaction with the sample, which is translated into a result, which is then reviewed by certified laboratory personnel. That's how she talked. What in the hell is she talking about? What in the world? That means, listen, a chemistry is performed so that a chemical reaction occurs, generates a signal from the chemical interaction. Okay, with this, yeah, I mean, it makes no sense. So that right there is hilarious. There was some article that said, where was it? Let's see if I got. Okay, nope. All right, the last thing that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to point you to, is Vanity Fair just did an incredible article about her dog pooping her last year at Theranos, and again, it will blow your mind. And I'll have links to all this in the article. Just enjoy yourselves. Take some casual reads through. She ruined people's lives. She caused people to commit suicide. She drained $900 million from her investors, and she never had a working prototype. You hear what I'm saying? She never had a working prototype. Yet she had rolled out her testing devices into Walgreens stores and was testing real patients on these unworking machines, lying about it, putting people in great danger. So when you talk about Madoff, who is probably the greatest con artist ever, Madoff never hurt anybody. He drained their life savings and ruined lives, don't get me wrong. He never hurt anyone. He never put anyone's life at risk. Elizabeth Holmes took it to Madoff and then went to the next level. Elizabeth Holmes willingly put people's lives on the line. Elizabeth Holmes wanted to send this faulty, crappy device into the Zika, the virus. Yeah, the Zika virus. She wanted to send them there. They didn't work. Like, they didn't work. She got turned down. Thank the Lord. They did clinical trials. She put people's lives at risk. This is a real villain. This is a real villain. So I can't wait to tell the story. And my next post, I think coming out tomorrow, is going to be a review of her TED Talk. It is hilarious. It is frustrating. It is gross. It is incompetent. It is all of those things. And that is how you describe and how you define Elizabeth Holmes. Those are all of her traits. All right. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.